Hello, everyone, and welcome to Debra and Peter Are Doing a Podcast with me, Peter Wanless, and you, Debra Alcott-Tyler, the Chief Executive of the Directory of Social Change.
Hi, Peter.
Hello, how
Hi,
are you?
listeners. I'm all right. How are you?
Good. Yeah, no, I'm very well. Thank you.
How's village life progressing?
Village life is, there was an interesting development over the weekend when one of our neighbours dropped by and asked if the family might be around to have some drinks with them later in the month. And I said, yes, kind of meaning might be. Anyway, next thing we know, some little lovely leaflets have dropped through been hand delivered, and they had a little kind of pile of them, and there's a little party to celebrate the arrival of Peter, Becky and the family to the village in our honour. So we'll definitely have to go to these drinks now, won't we? Or they'll all be talking about us.
Yes, because if they're in your honour, Peter, although, maybe you should get a sort of cardboard cutout of the Wanless family that can be shipped off to all the people you're in demand for. But there's a message there. You can just say no, except, of course, actually, that's not true. It's really difficult to say no in a small local community, particularly a village community, because things don't get forgotten easily.
No, and I should like and appreciate community engagement and community spirit and collective endeavour. And they'd come to talk to me about how the people in the village come together to monitor the speed of the cars going through the village and these sorts of things, and what can we each do to help one another and all of this. So I feel duty bound to be community spirited about all of this. Lady W is likes to be a bit more mysterious. I think she likes to be one of these people. Does she really exist, sort of thing? And I've already dragged her out to the end of season party with the cricketers. So who knows? There's everyone's going to know who she is before long. Anyway, let's talk about latest developments in the charity sector. Something that's I caught my eye was that the ICO, the Information Commissioner's Office, have put out a consultation on loosening the regime under which charities can or cannot contact their supporters about their cause. And this pushes lots of buttons for me, because back in the day, in the wake of the death of Olive Cook, wasn't it? There was a huge furore about charities being cavalier with their communications and bombarding supporters, very, very loosely defined, with all sorts of marketing messages of one kind or another. The upshot of all of this was that the NSPCC was actually one of the charities that got fined, and I had to appear before a select committee to account for the NSPCC's conduct in this broad area of fundraising and engagement, which, to be honest, I was, on the specifics, quite comfortable about defending and explaining what the NSPCC had and hadn't done. But actually, I also felt like things had got pretty out of control, and there was an awful lot of very, very flimsy, sometimes no good reason for charities to be continuing to send all sorts of unsolicited messages to people under the kind of thinnest of excuses. So it was an area that I think did need tightening up, particularly as data privacy and data protection was taking off and GDPR was being introduced and all the rest of it. I felt completely caught in the crossfire, and I think some of the wrong people got shot. But it did mean that everything got incredibly tightened. And as I say, I think some things should have been tightened. So there were organisations operating without proper privacy notices. There were organisations that were on the back of getting someone to tick a box in a huge long survey about something, nothing at all to do with the charity, but said they were interested in children or supported children. That was an excuse for any and every children's charity that wanted to contact them as many times as they wanted. So that did all need tightening up. But of course, as so often happens with these things, there's a great lurch in the opposite direction. And all of a sudden, charities that had relationships with supporters, which went back many years, were having to refresh and reconnect and get new permissions for contacting their supporters and renewing those permissions and refreshing them. And lots of individual citizens suddenly bombarded with all these options and opportunities and questions to opt out of this, that, or the other, just ticked no, I don't want to hear about anything. And all of a sudden, these conversations between good causes and people who could be supporting them were kind of cut off at their knees. So I always felt like while there was an issue to be grasped here, charities were being discriminated against by a kind of set of rules and regulations that were designed for commercial businesses, not for charities that want to engage and involve and have a kind of conversation with their supporters. And the definition of what constituted a marketing message was very, very tightly defined. Anyway, this is a very, very long introduction to say that there is a consultation going on at the moment, which is more enlightened and offers the opportunity for charities to have more chances to engage with their supporters, so long as these are properly documented. So I hope that plenty of charities will engage with the consultation and explain carefully why it helps to be engaged with people who are interested in your cause.
Well, I frequently find myself just feeling very, very frustrated about this whole issue, honestly, Peter. You know, there's a number of reasons for that. The first one is, I'm sure private sector companies have been fined for over-marketing. I've never read about it. It's never cropped up that I've ever seen in any major news, but I'm sure it must have happened somewhere. But what really annoys me about it is that there's an underlying assumption that businesses can't make money unless they market. So they're forgiven an awful lot of the crap that comes through your door, or the crappy television adverts you're forced to sit through, because it's expected. Of course, businesses need to market in order to make money, which is fair enough. But somehow that same logic isn't applied to the charitable sector, because the reality is, we know that people don't just give unless we ask them to give, and we specifically ask them to give. You know, and nobody wakes up in the morning and thinks, you know, while they're brushing their teeth and washing their face, oh, let me donate to charity today. It doesn't happen like that. The vast majority, as you well know, Peter, and as most of our listeners know, that people donate because they're actually asked to donate, because of buckets waved at them outside the supermarket. I mean, this is very pertinent this week, of course, because it's Armistice Day today. And for the last couple of weeks leading up to it, we've had, you know, most of the supermarkets I've been anywhere near have had people from the RBL fundraising from the public. Brilliant, quite right. And not just fundraising with the public, of course, reminding people about the whole point of the poppy and the whole thing. My father himself was stood outside Morrison's, I think, last weekend, fundraising. And ditto written communications, things that go through the letterbox. And so I think people are very often people who don't really understand how charities operate, get all judgmental about what we do without understanding that we're not selling something crap. We're not selling a widget. We're not selling, I don't know, credit. What we're doing is asking people to support children or animals or the environment or things that people care about. And they have a choice not to. They can say not to. And they do have the option to, you know, unlist themselves, if you see what I mean. And sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. So I get super frustrated about it. And also the cost. After all that business, you know, and so after that, and all the GDPR rules coming in, and, you know, as all the whole, you've got to rewrite to everybody. How much donors' money was some people might say well spent, I would say wasted. How much donor money? So again, you say to people, this money isn't magic charity money. The money to pay for all this bureaucracy is coming from donors. It's coming from your £5 or your £10 or your £50 or your however much money you can afford to give. And I think sometimes people just don't make that link. Particularly officious people who think they know better. Anyway, so I get very, very cross about it.
Yeah, I do as well, with probably 2/3 of my brain. And then there's another bit where I think there are some really important and interesting questions here about how invasive should or could charities be, in the balance between the legitimate and vitally important requirement to ask for money rather urgently because we've got something important to do on the one hand, and respect people's private lives and ability to go on with their everyday life in the other. And it's definitely the case that, I mean, what the NSPCC got caught on in the end was, and they had a good old look for everything they possibly could to trip the charity up on once they started in investigating. But it was a privacy notice, which in the many sentences of impenetrable stuff, which for these private companies that are doing this stuff all the time, we just tick through because we want to get to buy the thing it is we want to buy, did not have something in about using the information people were sharing for wealth screening. Now, wealth screening sounds a horrible and invasive thing. And when I give to charity, I don't, on the face of it, want people to know what my take-home income is and my salary is and all the rest of it. It's none of their bloody business, to be frank. On the other hand, if you are developing as a charity a targeted program aimed at helping people with significant disposable income later in their lives to think about how, in a tax efficient way, to make the best use of the money they've earned, so they don't end up giving it all to the taxpayer when they might rather want to use it to support children or animals or veterans or whatever it might be, then knowing about some of that information in order to craft a targeted communication or event for people who are likely to be interested in it is a rather good thing to do. If you're selling Rolls Royces, you don't push loads of kind of marketing messages out to people who can barely afford a bicycle. And so sophisticated kind of marketing, segmentation, understanding communication is really important. But you do, I think it's right to be careful about being clear with people what it is you're using, the purposes that you're using their information for. So in a sense, it was a kind of fair cop. It was completely marginal and different to the screaming and shouting that was going on in the newspapers at the time. And in the same way, it doesn't feel at all invasive to see the veterans and the volunteers out at all the railway stations in the run up to Armistice Day, because we know and love and want to associate with that, don't we? But arguably that is different from youths standing and blocking your way when you're in a hurry to get from somewhere to somewhere else, to ask you if you've got a moment to talk about children or animals or whatever, or knocking on your door after dark and saying, can I talk to you about the local hospice? And here there's quite a lot. So this is where, where do you draw the line?
Yes, exactly. This is where the area gets really grey for me. And, of course, vulnerable people, like giving people the opportunity to opt out and, following that. Although if you're a charity with thousands and thousands of donors, inevitably some are going to slip through the cracks, because that's just the nature of volume, isn't it? Something always leaks. In a big bucket sort of thing. So I think there needs to be some understanding about that. But I think it's also partly kind of the guilt issue. And I mean that in two different ways. Firstly, the fact that so many charities feel guilty about asking for money. Human beings feel very guilty and a bit embarrassed. It's that bit you're like, oh, please, can I have some, money, mister? Whereas I'm like, what you should never feel guilty about asking somebody for money, and it's okay for them to say no, but don't ever manage your ask simply because you think it's embarrassing for people. And the other side of that is that, because one of the criticisms that's often sort of edged at us as charities is that we make people feel guilty and we make them feel bad. Yes. That's the whole bloody point. You want people to feel bad about children who are starving or hungry or being abused. You want people to feel guilty and shamed about the number of animals who are so badly mistreated. You want people to feel shame and guilt about the state of the bloody waters and the environment and all the rest of it. So when people say to me, you mustn't make people feel guilty and ashamed, I say, bollocks. and guilt and shame are healthy emotions. It's good for us to feel those emotions because it makes us do the right thing. It makes us think, actually, do you know what? I do care about kids. And even though I'm not personally affected by this, I don't want ever to see any suffering. So I'm going to give them some money. So as you can probably tell, I get super excited about this, saying like, it's okay to make people feel guilty about what's going on in the world and ask them for money. It isn't okay to then pursue them in a way that's inappropriate.
And what about doing it after dark on the doorstep when you're trying to put your baby to sleep?
Kids to bed, yeah. I mean, sensible businesses market the right stuff at the right time to the right audience. Yeah. And I think it's the same with charities. Sensible charities will know that fundraising after dark, particularly in certain areas, is not going to go down well. We know there are certain periods of time when people are more likely to give. And we know there is, after the pub in the afternoon, for example, at a fundraising dinner when they've imbibed a bit, we know that. We're sophisticated enough to know that. So if there are, and often I think that it's not so much charities themselves and their direct volunteers, it's often the subcontracted fundraising companies who often are the ones who mess it up. When they're employed by the charities to do the fundraising, things do fall apart there sometimes. Not that I'm saying we shouldn't use them. It makes good economic sense very often. But I think that sometimes their desire to bring in, because they're businesses, their desire to bring in the money can often override the ethical considerations, which we would have more of an eye to as a charity.
Yeah, I went to Mystery Shop. I can't remember if I've told this story before. I went to Mystery Shop, a agency that were doing some fundraising for the NSPCC school service.
Oh, no, you haven't told us this.
Okay, so it was on my local high street, and it was to raise money for the school service because the NSPCC was going into the local primary school. So it wasn't knocking on people's doors, but it was a kind of stall that was set up in the middle of the marketplace. And I was a bit kind of skeptical, but I went along, and they were absolutely brilliant. And they didn't only convince me to make a regular donation, which I'm still making to the NSPCC as a result, but they convinced me that it should be twice as much as what I'd originally thought I was going to give per month. But they were also extremely diligent about my rights and the implications of what I was doing, and that if I decided on reflection that I would be receiving a follow-up communication, I would be able to stop doing it. And the attrition rates here are quite dramatic. Quite a lot of people do sign up in the moment and then regret doing so. And there are some questions there about, so how effective is that as a fundraising mechanism, and how do the people who subsequently decide not to give feel about it? But they were really brilliant, and they were so brilliant to the point where I couldn't stop myself, and I started saying things about the service which I couldn't possibly have known. And in the end, I thought, I've just got to let them know who I am. Oh, and they absolutely loved it. And I had I'll find the picture and I'll put it up on the with the podcast. But we sort of celebrated. It was a great piece of work. So I think, done well. At the right time and on terms which people can engage with. We have to interrupt people's lives, don't we?
Yes,
one of the good things for children's charities is that there are many moments when you are thinking about children in your day-to-day life. There were conversations which we were able to have with people about safety online when we had a partnership with O2. At the moment, people were buying their first phones, and there are similar things happening with Vodafone, I think, and the NSPCC now. So you can be more sophisticated than just like shouting and screaming in people's faces.
I think if what you're saying, I haven't read it myself, so I'm relying on your knowledge, Peter, but if what you're saying is the ICO are loosening up the requirements or consulting on it, I think that's a very good thing, because I think that we have a tendency, especially with charities, like we crack down on charities, like massively overplay it, I think, but to think that the way you stop the bad uns is with increasing and ever more detailed legislation, regulations, all the rest of it. The reality is bad people or bad-minded actors are always going to be bad-minded and do bad stuff. And no amount of laws or regulations is ever going to stop that. And what happens is you end up costing perfectly law-abiding, decent, honourable charities vast sums of money, because of the very small number of people who abuse it. Do you see what I mean? So I think a lighter touch is better.
Well,
and then you just have to track down the baddies, there always will be baddies, always.
Honestly, this proposed change is pretty marginal in those scheme of things, and I think the administrative overhead of policing all of this will be excessive relative to the benefit. Nevertheless, it is a move in the right direction, and it is a recognition that charities operate differently from commercial businesses, and it was impossible to get anyone to acknowledge that at all back in the day when this was eye of the storm stuff. So it caught my eye, and it's a step in the right direction. And so if people could communicate positive yes and responses to this consultation, which closes on November the 25th, I think that would be a good thing.
Well, I shall get my policy chap Jay to take a look and see if there's something we can contribute to it. Although our recent experience with the SALT consultation was that consultations very often aren't worth a great deal because none of that was taken seriously. Anyway, bitterness to one side. The story that caught my eye this week was the Molly Rose Foundation has just published its 2024 accounts. And they had an income of just under £100,000 in 2023, which shot up to 2.2 million in 2024. And apparently, from what I read, that's down to some big donations from some large media giants. And it's speculative because I understand that the donors wanted to remain anonymous. And I'm not quite sure how the names have occurred. So I'm not going to say them just in case I'm saying something I shouldn't. But there are a couple of things that really struck me about it. The first one is that, if a charity has a sudden massive surge of income, like so huge, I mean, the difference between slightly under 100,000 and 2.2 million is massive. That's absolutely massive. How do you manage it? And I've seen charities, because this isn't the first time this has happened. There are plenty of charities who suddenly get an unexpected massive gift. And what I've often seen is trustees thinking, oh, we've had a really, really good year because look at all this money we got. Now our aspirations are to maintain it or keep it at that level, when you simply can't because it's a one-off thing. So something about the dangers of getting over enthusiastic about that and sort of spending like mad and not thinking carefully through it. But the other thing was about anonymity of donors. And again, I'm kind of, I get why donors want to be anonymous, and I get why charities honour their wishes. But it really, really bothers me if donations are anonymous, because you don't know what kind of influence that donor or that individual is having on that charity. You don't, there are plenty of charities who get asked really hard questions about where the donations come from, where they're not being transparent about it. And it's because, I remember Luke Fitzherbert, which some readers may hear, he was always very anti-anonymous donations because he said that anonymous donations very often signify an unaccounted power. You can't hold anybody to account. And I personally am really uncomfortable about it. I mean, I get why especially individuals do it because they don't want to be hounded by all the other charities in the world, etc. But there are other ways of doing it. You could set up a foundation, or you could do it through a community foundation or something. But so that bothers me a lot. So I don't know what you think about those.
Yeah, well, we had a conversation on a previous podcast about the Institute of Economic Affairs.
That's right. Yeah,
and the kind of and I sought to defend the potential of a charitable organisation to promote market-based solutions to policy problems, which you found a bit difficult. But we both agreed that the fact that no one really knows where their money's coming from is troublesome. And
not illegal.
Not illegal.
No, it's not against the law.
But if you choose or are required not to say who your donors are, that could well have an implication for whether or not other people will give to you as a charity, because they may, you can't make a judgment, can you, about quite how that money is restricted and where it's from. So that's definitely an issue. On the kind of sudden, it's a nice problem to have,
isn't it?
And it's an important issue, an area that they are working in, and I bet they'll have this kind of dilemma between wanting to spend it fast and not have it looking like lots of money is sitting there for no very good reason, and telling the story that if you want to establish a sustainable organisation, you need to employ some people over a period of time to
bring in the money
happen, and employing 2 people at $1 million each is probably not the answer.
Yeah, it isn't. I remember years and years and years ago, I was talking to he was the chief executive of a very, very large, I won't name the name, very, very large company that had a lot of public service contracts, and he was at a local event that I was attending. I was the guest speaker at, and I was talking about, company giving and corporate giving and all the rest of it. And afterwards, when we were having like the sort of drinks reception after, I was talking to him, and I said, who do you donate to personally? And he told me, he donated to very big charities, multi-million-pound charities. And he said, I would never donate to a smaller charity. And I said to him, well, why not? And he said, well, they wouldn't know how to manage the money. And of course, that ruffled all of my feathers. It's like, we bloody well do know how to manage money. We just don't have much of it. But it was really interesting because I said to him, look, of course you must donate to the things you care about, but I don't think size should be a factor. No. I don't think it's like, great thinking to say they're big, so I'm going to give them my money. I said, because the money that you've donated to this particular charity, I won't name names, it's probably, it's important to them and it matters, but it's a very small amount relative to the whole amount that they fundraise. Whereas that same amount of money given to a smaller charity with less than £1 million turnover is going to have a significant impact and is going to do something really quite big and important in that smaller charity. So, it's worth thinking about when you're donating. Of course, donate to big charities. That's the right thing to do. But it's also thinking about if you have substantial sums to, a few £1,000s or whatever to donate, could a local charity do something really transformative with that money that, wouldn't necessarily happen in a bigger one?
Yeah,
not that I ever want to put big and small against each other, because ultimately people need to donate to things that they care about. So, but it's just asking that question. There's his thing about impact and safety.
Because it does happen the other way around as well, that people say, well, I won't give to big charities. And some of the most unlikely people who are engaged in transformative business activities of one sort or another, who wouldn't dream of trying to find the solution to Alzheimer's or whatever in a local experiment in one place, find it difficult to give to a national charity. So you hear both, don't you? And I think it's there's the key is what's the passion and purpose, and how clear is the organisation about what it's trying to do, and what do you want to see achieved? I don't think there are quite a few things happening in the village that I don't think national charities are interested in or could do. But if we come together in the village, we might have an impact on the speed of cars going through the road here, but we won't find a cure for cancer.
Yes. Yeah. So, yeah. But I mean, I think we're in. It's not straightforward, but there is this point about, this kind of patronising view that small charities couldn't cope with large influxes of income, which is, not true and very annoying. But there is also the danger, as I've seen, of boards of trustees suddenly getting a big wash of money and sort of thinking, this is our fortunes have turned. We can keep aiming for more and more and more. And often that isn't the case. Your big one-off donations, your big legacy income, for example, there was huge amount of luck because somebody who had a lot of wealth and property left it all to you. That's not going to come every year, and I think it's being careful about managing expectations.
Yes, again, we talked, didn't we, in the previous podcast about budgeting and the different money that's one-off and money that is sustained, and not mixing the two up. So
well, I think we're probably just about there for this week, aren't we, Peter? When is your drinks due?
We'll
in your honour.
We've got another podcast before that.
Okay, so a couple of weeks. So
not this weekend coming, but the next one. So I've got time to
convince Becky
prepare.
And One List Junior.
And my sister-in-law.
Oh yes, of course.
That's the other great. So I said to Becky, if you don't want to come, I'll take your sister, and that will confuse the neighbours.
Well, I'm going to say they're going to be asked because she's living in the annex, isn't she?
Yeah.
She's going to be like that Peter One List with, what's that? What's the very famous? Is it Bewley. What's the name of the Duke who used to have his wifeys or wifelets? What the hell? He owns,
yeah.
do you know, Duke of Westminster.
No, it was the guy at
he owns
Longleat,
Bewley.
wasn't it?
Yeah.
Longleat, I think.
Longleat, that's it, the safari park.
Yeah.
Whatever his name was, he was famous for having his wifelets.
Anyway,
you'll get a reputation in the village, Peter.
There's none of that nonsense going on here.
You need to have a badge made for her which says, I am only Peter's sister-in-law, but I live in the annex.
Yeah.
We barely speak most days. Because
very good.
Lovely as villages are in community life, how very gossipy they are too. You're bound to be a source of gossip, Peter. Of course, because we like to talk about people.
That's why we need to be there, because when you're not there,
that's when, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Better go.
All right. Lovely chatting to you. See you again next week.
Next week. Yeah.
Bye, listeners. Bye.